About 170 kilometers southwest of the city of St. Petersburg lies the historic yet pretty small town of Veliky Novgorod. Although today the town still shows its historic roots, be that the Grand Kremlin overlooking the city or the dozens of churches scattered around, it doesn't really paint the full picture. The full picture of what was once one of the biggest trading powers in the Baltic, the capital of a great Russian state that lasted for centuries, and the center of democracy in an otherwise feudal Europe. Originally, the land that would have become Novgorod was inhabited by various different tribes of Slavic and Finno-Ugric origin. The tribes, being tribes, often fought each other in the form of raids and attacks against one another, but eventually the tribes became kinda sick of constantly fighting each other, and so they would establish a union amongst each other around 830 AD. Even though they were now at peace in the form of a union, they were still rather disunited and they lacked any form of government. The tribes, being tired of the unstable nature of the union, called for help in finding a ruler, and to their aid came the Varangian prince Rurik and his advisors to the area to establish a state. That he did, and in 862 AD the city of Novgorod was founded, which is coincidentally the year Novgorod was first mentioned by the main Novgorod chronicle. There is however evidence that Novgorod was a somewhat prominent trading outpost along the from Varangians to the Greeks trading network before the arrival of Rurik. The city continued to be a small settlement along the mouth of the Volchev River until 882, when Prince Oleg, kinsman of Rurik who came to power 3 years earlier in 879 after Rurik died, conquered Kiev and established the state of Kiev in Rus, in which Kiev became the new capital. Despite Novgorod being under the control of Kiev, it was still one of the most important centers of the Slavic world, and certainly a trading power in the Kievan Rus. Eventually, as the state of Kiev and Rus started to decline in power, Novgorod started to exert more power and freedom over itself, and in 1019, Yaroslav the Wise of Kiev granted Novgorod independence from Kiev, although it was still a vassal state of the Kievan Rus. Once Yaroslav died in 1034, Vladimir II, oldest son of Yaroslav, became Prince of Novgorod. As prince, he started to build up the city, as seen with the Novgorod Kremlin in 1044 and St. Sophia Cathedral in 1045. The state of Kievan Rus started to lose grip on Novgorod in the early 12th century as the Kievan state weakened and desire for Novgorodian independence grew. Eventually, after revolting against Kiev in 1136, Novgorod managed to remove Kievan power from the region and the Republic of Novgorod was established. Novgorod was now an independent republic centered on the city of Novgorod. Now, the way Novgorod functioned as a republic was through the Veche. The Veche was an assembly of people, all the way from the average freedman to boyars, met to decide on provincial and state matters. The Veche could be attended by nearly anyone and it was a truly important force, with it even being powerful enough to veto and dismiss princes if the people didn't like them. Despite this, scholars on the topic debate just how important the Veche truly was, with some scholars saying it was a purely advisory body and others claiming it was the main driving force of Novgorodian politics and affairs. Even if the Veche was just an assembly of disgruntled farmers and old burghers, it still can't be denied that the Veche was one of the most important facets of Novgorodian rule and life. The Novgorodian Veche allowed the opinions of the general populace to be heard by the local rulers, so if a prince or a posanik, for in other words a mayor, wanted to stay in power and have the support of the people, then the opinion of the Veche was essential for them to stay in power. Now, despite the Veche being a great system of democratic rule in an otherwise feudal and restrictive Europe, it was still far from perfect and probably not that great either. The Veche met irregularly, with the assembly only being called up when the so-called Veche bell rang. It had no real rules to it and decisions were only made once one side of the argument gave up. The Veche was also not fully democratic as different boyar families often managed to sway the outcome of its meetings in their interest. Anyways, a big problem that the Novgorodian Republic faced was constant raids from Cumans, who were a full group of raiders from the Eurasian steppe, and Igor Sviatoslavich, son of the first prince of Novgorod, Sviatoslav Olgovich, decided to wage several campaigns against the Cuman, and he was, for the most part, successful, until he wasn't, when his army lost and he was captured in 1185, although he did luckily manage to escape 1 year later, which is good for him, I guess. To the west of Novgorod lay the newly established Livonian Order, then also known as the Order of the Knights of the Sword, and the Novgorodians, let's just say, weren't too fond of them. The Livonians rapidly expanded and they were now seen as a threat against Novgorod. In 1220, the Uganians, a Finnic people group who lived in the Livonian occupied territories, rebelled and they called upon the Rus states for help. This resulted in Novgorod, along with Polotsk and Suzdal, to send aid of 20,000 men to help the rebellion, although by 1224 the Livonians managed to quell the rebellion and subdue the Uganians. In 1242, the Livonian and Teutonic Order, on the request of Pope Gregory IX, invaded Novgorod, and this invasion would go absolutely terribly. The Prince of Novgorod, Alexander Nevsky, who later got canonized by the Russian Church in 1547, defeated the Livonians and Teutons in the battle on the ice on the 5th of April, where their forces got massacred by Nevsky's force, and this halted all expansion eastward by the Livonians. Despite defeating the Livonians, Alexander Nevsky still had to deal with threats to the Rus. This time, the threat came eastward from the Golden Horde, which was the western European part of the Mongol Empire, and at this point it was led by Batu Khan. The Horde had already sacked the city of Kiev in 1240, which led to the Kievan Rus to finally collapse, and so it was a clear sign that the Khanate was a threat. Alexander's father, Prince Yaroslav II of Vladimir, tried to unite the Rus states against the Horde, but he mysteriously died in 1246 after returning from a visit to the Great Khan. In reaction, Alexander and his younger brother, Andrei, tried to appeal to the Khan, and it resulted in Andrei becoming the new Prince of Vladimir and Alexander becoming the new Prince of Kiev. Andrew was still not on the best of terms with the Mongols, even after becoming Prince of Vladimir, so he started to conspire against the Horde with other Russian princes, and Alexander decided to spill the beans to the Horde, who promptly overthrew Andrew and installed Alexander as prince in 1252. By 1263, Alexander was the prince over a massive domain, but this wouldn't be that important since he would die the same year. His domains were split among his children, with his youngest son Daniel inheriting and becoming the first prince of the newly established Duchy of Muscovy, a duchy which will not play any more significance in the history of Novgorod. Now, you might wonder how Novgorod became so prosperous, and one of, if not the biggest reason, is trade. As stated previously, Novgorod was on the from the Virgins to the Greeks trade route, and Novgorod traded a lot with the Hanseatic League, since it had connections to the Baltic Sea via the Gulf of Finland. The vast trade routes of the state, as well as the abundant resources already on the land, allowed for various luxury goods to be sold on the markets of Novgorod, such as silver, fur, glassware, wine, silk, etc. The eastern side of the city of Novgorod was home to the so-called commercial side, in which vast markets and rows of shops allowed you to buy goods from all over the Republic and its trade routes. The main exports of Novgorod were fish, beeswax, honey, fur and iron, and the Novgorodian trading economy largely stood on the back of these exports. Returning to the main topic, after the death of Alexander Nevsky, the Republic started to go downhill. This was due to the rise in the surrounding principalities, most notably Moscow. By the 1330s, the Principality of Vladimir had lost much of its former importance, and Moscow was there to take the place of it. There was a major rebellion in Novgorod against the Golden Horde that ended fantastically, but not for the Novgorodians. The rebellion was squashed, and this left Novgorod weakened. This could only mean one thing: total Moscow domination. Moscow was now the dominant power in Russia, and no other princedom could challenge it. As a consequence of this weakening, Novgorod became a vassal state of Muscovy in 1327. A consequence of this vassalization was that Novgorod now didn't have an elected prince, which kinda made it special, but instead in practice the Prince of Moscow was now the Prince of Novgorod as well. Now, this entire situation might sound bad for the Novgorodians, and that's because it is. But it only became worse as the region of Pskov within the Republic gained full autonomy from Novgorod, and they got full independence after signing the Treaty of Bolatovo in 1348. Now, Novgorod was already on its knees to Muscovy, but this was only about to get worse as Ivan III entered the picture. Ivan III, also known as Ivan the Great, became the Prince of Muscovy, and he ascended to the throne in 1462, after his father Vasily II was famously blind. Now, over the course of several decades, the Novgorodian elite, or boyars, tried to get greater autonomy from their Muscovite overlords, and by this point, the fairly representational rule that Novgorod was famous for was basically gone, with most of the power being held in a few elites and possadniks, or essentially mayors. Novgorod also sought protection from the Duchy of Lithuania, but that never happened for one reason. Ivan III was a very expansionist leader, and he knew that Novgorod was easy prey. After Novgorod refused to be annexed by Moscow, Ivan III invaded Novgorod in 1471. Ivan's army defeated the Novgorodians at the Battle of Chelon, despite being heavily outnumbered. One of the reasons for this was due to Novgorod's army being largely composed of poorly trained and equipped peasant militias and foreign soldiers, which caused the Novgorodian force to be disorganized and very ineffective. Novgorod surrendered after the battle and surrendered a good chunk of land. The war proved a massive defeat for Novgorod, got put in their place by Muscovy, and failed to gain an ally in the form of Lithuania to the west. Apparently, the Novgorodians didn't learn their lesson and still resisted Muscovite rule. The Duchy of Moscow was very displeased with the rebelliousness, and this can be seen in the Moscow Chronicles, which states that, quote-unquote, these people of Novgorod are called Christians, but their actions are worse than those of infidels, and thus the Grand Prince makes war on them, not as Christians, but as idolaters and traitors to orthodoxy. In 1478, Muscovy invaded Novgorod yet again, and this time it was for good. Novgorod surrendered entirely to Muscovy, and Novgorod ceased to exist. Ivan III took 80% of Novgorodian lands for himself and his allies, and after 342 years, the Republic of Novgorod finally fell. In conclusion, Novgorod was one of the most important commercial and political entities in the history of Eastern Europe, and its effects must be commended, although it's seldom remembered today. The Republic played an important role in what Russia was and what it became later on, and even after it fell, its effects could still be seen. Novgorod set a democratic principle in an otherwise absolute and feudal Europe, and no matter how flawed Novgorodian democracy was, it still paved the way for a democratic future for the people of Russia. A path of democracy in Russia that has surely carried over into the 21st century.